It started with the smell of old paper and rain. That mix, musty pages, wet pavement, and faint lavender, somehow made the air feel heavier. I'd come into Darrow's secondhand books to kill time between freelance shifts, mostly because my laptop had died and the cafe across the street was too loud to think in. I didn't expect to meet anyone, especially not her. She stood behind the counter, reading something worn and thick, a pencil tucked behind her ear. Mid-40s, maybe. Sharp posture, soft eyes. The kind of woman who looked like she'd learned to listen more than she spoke. When she glanced up, I almost turned away. There was nothing flirtatious in her look, just a quiet curiosity, the kind that made you wonder what she saw that you didn't. Looking for anything specific? She asked, voice calm, low, almost careful. Something that makes time pass slower, I said before thinking. She smiled faintly, like she understood more than I meant to say. That's ambitious. She walked around the counter, brushing her hand along the spines as if she knew each book personally. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried. I followed a step behind, pretending to look at titles, but mostly trying to understand why my chest felt tight. She stopped near the philosophy section, fingers resting on letters to a young poet. Try this, she said. It doesn't make time pass slower, but it might make you aware of it. I took the book from her hand, and for a second, our fingers touched, barely. It wasn't electricity, not in the movie sense. More like static, an interruption of air, too brief to name. I cleared my throat. Do you read this often? I used to, she said. Now I read it when I forget who I was. Something about that answer stayed with me. There was a quiet ache in it, like regret wrapped in calmness. I wanted to ask what she meant, but she had already turned away, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I lingered longer than I should have. Bought the book, even though I wasn't sure I'd read it. She rang it up, her nails tapping lightly on the counter. I noticed the small scar across her wrist, a pale, straight line that disappeared when she moved. You're not from around here, are you? She asked. Just moved. Doing odd jobs until I figure things out. She nodded as if that explained everything. Figuring things out never really ends. That line, simple, half-smiled, half-resigned, hit harder than it should have. Outside, the rain had thickened. I stood under the awning, the book pressed against my chest, watching her through the window as she rearranged the front display. At one point, she looked up, directly at me. Not surprised, not inviting, just seeing. I looked away first. I told myself I'd stop by again because of the book selection, but that wasn't true. The next day, I found an excuse to return, a question about a missing page, maybe, or whether she accepted trade-ins. I don't even remember what I said. I just remember the way her eyes softened, as if she was both expecting me and pretending not to. Every time she spoke, her tone carried something restrained, like warmth held behind glass. And every time I left, I'd think about that single brush of her fingers, that faint lavender scent, that unreadable look. It wasn't love, not even close, just a pause that hadn't ended yet. And later that night, lying awake, I caught myself whispering the question I hadn't dared to ask her. Why does it feel like she already knows me? The second time I saw her, the sky had that washed-out color that comes after rain, everything muted, edges soft. She was kneeling by a box of old hardcovers outside the shop, trying to shield them from the wind. One of the cardboard flaps tore, scattering books across the sidewalk. Without thinking, I bent to help. Careful, she said, a little out of breath. They're older than both of us. Her laugh was quiet, but it cracked something open. We stacked the books together, Virginia Woolf, Baldwin, Rilke again. She brushed the dust from a spine with her thumb, a motion so tender it didn't feel like about the book anymore. When I handed her the last one, her fingers lingered on it, then slipped away too fast, as if she'd caught herself. Thank you, she said, standing, tucking a curl behind her ear. You didn't have to. I know, I replied. But you looked like you'd do it even if it broke your back. That made her pause. The kind of silence that happens when someone almost says something real, then swallows it. Inside, she offered me tea, for the trouble. The shop was dim, the air smelling faintly of chamomile and dust. She poured carefully, hands steady but tense, like she was afraid of spilling more than just the tea. You run this place alone? I asked. She nodded. It used to be my sister's. I kept it after she left. Some things are harder to let go of than others. Her voice cracked slightly on left. And for a moment, she looked smaller. The kind of tired that doesn't come from work. I wanted to ask what happened, but she straightened, put the kettle back, and changed the subject with a faint smile. So, you're still figuring things out? Every day, I said. Mostly I just pretend I'm not. That made her laugh again, soft, genuine, and it felt like light in a dark room. She looked away quickly, almost embarrassed by it. There was a silence then, not empty, just full of something neither of us wanted to name. The kind of pause that hums quietly between people who shouldn't be this comfortable. Her hands wrapped around her mug, fingers pale from the heat. I noticed a faint tremor when she set it down. It's been a long day, she murmured, more to herself. I wanted to say something, anything, but the word stuck. Instead, I slid the last book we'd saved across the table toward her. This one, I said, you almost lost it. She looked at it for a long time, then at me. Her expression softened, but her eyes carried something fragile, almost warning. I lose things all the time, she said quietly. It's easier than holding on. Her words hung in the air, fragile as dust motes in the late light. When I left, she didn't say goodbye, just a nod, the faintest lift at the corner of her lips. And as the door closed behind me, I caught my reflection in the glass, wondering if I'd just become another thing she was trying not to hold on to. The rain had come back, harder this time. Thin needles against the windows, tapping a rhythm that made the small bookshop feel even smaller. I'd stayed later than usual, helping her reorganize the poetry shelves after a shipment arrived half-soaked. She hadn't asked me to. I just didn't want to leave. The lights buzzed faintly, the old kind that hum like they're tired too. She moved quietly between aisles, barefoot now, shoes left by the door to dry. Her hair was damp at the edges, and the fabric of her sweater clung a little to her shoulders. You don't have to stay, she said, stacking a pile of books. I know. I answered, trying not to sound like I meant I don't want to go. She gave a small nod, as if she'd heard the part one didn't say. We worked in silence for a while, the rain filling in what words couldn't. Every so often, I caught her watching me, quick, sidelong glances that she tried to hide by pretending to read the back covers. When the power flickered, the room dimmed into half-shadow. She reached for the lamp, but I'd already crossed over, my hand brushing hers on the switch. Just a brief touch. Still, it froze us both. Her breath hitched, barely audible, but enough. Sorry, I said, pulling back. It's fine, she murmured, though her voice came out lower than usual. The lamp glowed again, warm and soft, turning the space golden. She looked at me then, really looked. Something tired and alive lived in that gaze. Why are you doing this? She asked quietly. What do you mean? Helping. Coming back. Staying late. Her tone wasn't accusing, just searching. You don't owe me anything. I could have said something simple. I like books, I like the quiet. But I didn't. Instead, the words came out slower. Maybe I just like being where things feel still. She held my stare a second too long. Then, almost to herself, she said, stillness can be dangerous. Before I could ask what she meant, her phone buzzed on the counter. A name flashed on the screen, Elliot. I watched her hesitate, then answer. Her voice dropped, firm but careful. I told you not to call me here, she said, glancing toward me as if remembering I was still in the room. No, I'm not doing this again. Please, just don't. The conversation ended abruptly. She stood still for a moment, fingers trembling as she set the phone down. Then, without looking at me, she exhaled. He's someone I used to care about. The room felt too quiet after that. I wanted to say something, to tell her she didn't have to explain, but the words stayed behind my teeth. So instead, I moved a stack of books closer to her, close enough that our sleeves brushed when we reached for the same one. This time, neither of us moved away. The storm outside cracked, a sharp flash through the window. In that half-second of light, her eyes flicked to mine, uncertain, searching. Then she stepped back. You should go before it gets worse. I nodded, but neither of us moved. The distance between us felt like a decision waiting to happen. And when I finally opened the door to leave, I swear I heard her whisper my name, so softly I couldn't tell if it was real or just something I'd been hoping to hear. The next morning, the shop felt different, quieter, heavier, like the walls remembered something we hadn't said. She was already there when I arrived, sweeping the floor with slow, deliberate strokes. The bell above the door chimed, and she looked up briefly, her face composed but pale around the eyes. "You're early," she said. "So are you." She didn't answer, just kept sweeping, her motions precise, as though order could erase what almost happened last night. I busied myself with the window display, pretending not to notice the distance she was building. The silence between us wasn't awkward, it was aware. Every sound, every breath, seemed to echo too loudly. When she finally spoke, it was without looking at me. "I shouldn't have called you back last night." I froze mid-motion. "You didn't." Her eyes met mine then, sharp, unguarded. "No, but I wanted to." There was nothing to say to that. My pulse stuttered. I stepped closer without meaning to, close enough to smell the faint scent of tea and rain still clinging to her sweater. "You make things," she paused, searching for the right word. "Complicated." I almost laughed, but it came out too soft. "I'm not sure I've done anything at all." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's the problem." Her hands tightened on the broom handle. She set it down, crossing her arms, not in defense, but as if holding herself together. "This isn't," she started, then stopped. The words tangled somewhere between restraint and confession. "You're young. You have years ahead of you." "I'm tired," I asked quietly. She looked startled. Then, slowly, she nodded. Something in that silence felt sacred. The hum of the ceiling fan, the faint thud of rain outside, her breath catching before each sentence. "I don't know what this is," I said finally. "But it's not nothing." Her gaze softened at that. "That's exactly why it scares me." I wanted to reach for her then, to say something steady, something kind, but she turned away, hands pressed flat against the counter. Her shoulders trembled once, barely. "You remind me of the part of myself I buried," she whispered. "The one that still wanted more." The air felt too thin to breathe. "Then maybe," I said, voice almost breaking, "it's time to dig her up." She turned at that, eyes glassy but fierce. "Don't," she said. "You don't know what it costs to feel like that again." We stood there for what felt like forever, neither moving, neither retreating. Then she reached for the broom again, though her hands shook too much to hold it steady. "Let's just keep things simple," she murmured. "Is that even possible anymore?" Her silence was answer enough. She looked at me one last time, her expression stripped of every mask she'd worn. And when she finally spoke, it wasn't a confession, just surrender. "I wish I'd met you before I learned how to stay lonely." For a week, she kept her distance. The rhythm of the shop returned. Quiet mornings, slow afternoons, the sound of pages turning instead of words. She spoke to me the way people do when they're afraid of saying too much. Polite, careful. I told myself it didn't bother me, but every time she brushed past, every time her hand paused near mine and then withdrew, I felt the absence like static under my skin. Then one evening, when the last customer left and the rain began again, she said, "Could you lock the door?" Her tone was calm, but her eyes had that faraway focus of someone about to step into something difficult. She sat behind the counter and reached into a drawer, pulling out an old phone, the kind with a cracked screen and frayed charger. She scrolled through it in silence, then pressed play. A voice came through, soft, male, older. "Maeve, if you're hearing this, I guess I didn't make it to the ferry after all. Don't wait for me. Please don't." I didn't move, didn't even breathe. She stopped the recording before it ended. Her thumb trembled slightly against the glass. "He left this 2 years ago," she said. "We were supposed to start over somewhere quieter. He drowned before the boat even left the harbor." Her voice didn't crack, but the space around her did. I didn't know what to say. Words felt wrong in that moment, too clean for something so jagged. "I still check the tide reports," she added, almost like an apology. "Every morning. Like knowing the water's calm might make it less real." She gave a small, humorless laugh, shaking her head. "When you first came here, you had his way of standing. Shoulders slightly turned, like you're always half ready to leave. It startled me. I tried to meet her eyes, but she looked down, tracing the rim of her cup. I thought maybe if I kept you around, she said, it would fade. But it didn't. You remind me of him, and at the same time, you don't. That's what scares me. I swallowed hard. You could have told me. I didn't know what to tell you. She exhaled, long and tired. I didn't expect you to stay. The hum of the refrigerator filled the pause that followed. I noticed her hands again. How still they were now, resting on the counter, palms open as if finally surrendering something invisible. I wanted to reach for her, but it didn't feel right. Not now. Instead, I said quietly, maybe I stayed because you did. Her eyes lifted then, wet, unsure, but alive in a way I hadn't seen before. Neither of us spoke again. The moment hung there, delicate as breath. When I left, she didn't stop me. But just before the door closed, she whispered, almost to herself, he used to say that too. She didn't open the shop for 3 days. I told myself to stay away, but the habit of showing up had already rooted itself in me. On the 4th morning, I found the door half locked, the closed sign tilted sideways. I knocked once, then again. Her voice came from inside, soft, hoarse. It's open. The place was dim, shades drawn halfway. She was sitting on the floor behind the counter, surrounded by books that looked like they'd fallen and never been picked up again. A half-finished cup of tea sat beside her, long gone cold. I was reorganizing, she said, without conviction. I crouched beside her, helping gather the scattered pages. You mean avoiding? She gave a weak smile. That too. We sat there for a while, sorting through the mess, saying nothing that mattered and everything that did. Every so often, her shoulder brushed mine. Neither of us moved away. Finally, she spoke, voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to do with this. With what? This space between us. It feels too much and not enough at the same time. Her fingers fidgeted with the corner of a torn page. I watched the small movements, the way her hand trembled before she stilled it against her knee. I keep thinking, she continued, if I let this happen, whatever this is, I'll lose something of him. But if I don't, she exhaled shakily, I keep losing you instead. I didn't try to fill the silence. I just sat there, close enough for her to know I wasn't leaving. After a while, I said, maybe we don't have to name it yet. She looked at me then, eyes searching, tired but alive, like a storm had passed and left the air raw but clear. You're too young to sound that certain, she murmured. Maybe, I said. Or maybe you've just made me older. That made her laugh, quietly. Not the brittle kind I'd heard before, but something small and real. The sound faded, and in its place came stillness, the kind that doesn't demand, doesn't hide. I reached for a fallen book, slid it toward her. Our hands met halfway, fingers brushing. She didn't pull away this time. For a long moment, we just sat there, side by side, surrounded by the quiet chaos we hadn't cleaned up yet. I keep trying to convince myself this is wrong, she said finally. And she leaned her head back against the counter, eyes closed. I'm tired of convincing myself of anything. Her hand was still under mine, warm now. No words after that. No declarations. Just breathing. The sound of two people finally not pretending. The clock above us ticked softly, and the light shifted across the floor, slow and golden. When I finally stood to leave, she didn't stop me. She only looked up and said, gently, almost like a promise, tomorrow, bring coffee instead of tea. It's been almost a year since the first time I stepped into that shop. The rain sounds different now, less like an interruption, more like background music to a life that somehow found rhythm again. She still opens the store every morning, still sweeps the same wooden floor, still brews the same weak chamomile tea she swears helps her think. But there's something softer about her now. The weight she carried has settled into something gentler, like a book finally put down after too many rereads. I come by most days. Sometimes I help. Sometimes I just sit at the counter, pretending to read while she talks to customers. She doesn't say much to me when others are around. She never needed to. But there's a quiet understanding in how she places my cup before I ask, or how her hand lingers an extra second when she passes a receipt. We never named what this is. Maybe we didn't need to. I've stopped trying to fit it into words. Love, grief, redemption. They all feel too heavy for what it really became. It's simpler than that. It's mornings spent in silence without the need to fill them. It's her laughter when I misquote a poem. It's the way she looks at me now, not as a replacement, not as a mistake, but as something real that grew in the aftermath of loss. I think about the man in the recording sometimes, the one she waited for, the one who never came back. I used to be jealous of his ghost, of the way he lingered in every room, every pause. But now I understand. He isn't a shadow between us anymore. He's part of the story that led her here, and maybe part of why she could finally let someone in again. She once told me that love isn't always about beginning again. It's about continuing differently. I didn't understand then. I think I do now. Some nights, when the lights go out and the street outside hums with quiet traffic, we sit on the floor where all those books once fell, our shoulders touching, nothing left to confess. The world doesn't need to know what it means. It's enough that we do. Sometimes she still asks, half teasing, why me? And I still answer, without hesitation, because my heart chose you. She always shakes her head at that, pretends it's too much, too dramatic, but the small, unguarded smile she gives afterward says otherwise. If there's anything this story taught me, it's that love doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it walks in on a rainy day, hands you a book, and changes everything quietly, one unspoken moment at a time. So, if you're watching this, don't wait for the perfect words or the perfect person. Just pay attention to the small things. They're where everything begins.